This is the Silverstone DS380 NAS case. It supports 8 hot swap bays, and it supports ITX motherboards, mini DTX motherboards, and requires an SFX PSU in it. So I'm going to go ahead and do a build-up of this case and set it up with 8 hard drives and kind of assess it for what it takes to build, as well as the cooling characteristics and sound characteristics of it and everything else like that. So first, let's take a quick look at the case itself. Now, it does support 8 hot swap bays, as mentioned, in these little caddies here. It does have that back plane in there. It looks like it may support SAS drives, at least the slot will. Doesn't mean that the back plane or the computer will. We'll check that out. You can see it's got 2 USB 3.0 ports here and separate headphone and microphone jacks, which is weird, especially for a NAS type case like this. And then a power button, reset button there, and then a couple of status lights. Front, there's supposed to be a Silverstone logo here, and I think it might actually come in the accessories box that comes with it. We'll take a look and see. But flipping this thing around, you can see on the side, just plain here, it's probably just a cable hider area. And then in the back here, you can see it supports a dual width, full height PCIe card in here. And then the SFX power supply is mounted here. Now, if you're not aware, SFX power supplies are typically much smaller than your ATX power supplies that you're used to in a desktop or your gaming PC. And this is the Silverstone SX300 here. So it's 300 watt power supply. It should be adequate to support 8 drives and the CPU that's in there. Speaking of which, I'm going to be building this up with the this ASRock motherboard, which contains it's a much older CPU. It's an i5-4590, but it comes with 6 onboard SATA ports. I'm also going to put in a PCIe HBA card for a LSI 9211-8i SATA adapter here, so it can run an additional 8 SATA devices off of that instead of off the motherboard if you desire. And then just, if you're curious, it actually has an mSATA SSD on the bottom. It's an older technology, but it can be used to boot the NAS OS off of it. You can see here it comes with a 120 millimeter fan in here. We'll see how good that is, but this is a Silverstone case. And Silverstone usually makes some good cooling solutions. And then over on this side, you can see here you've got the ventilation on top, as well as, let's take a look at that, the ventilation on the side here with this removable magnetic grill. You've got the 2 120 millimeter fans inside of here. So we'll assess the performance of these fans for keeping the drives cool, as well as sound, etc. So I know you can swap them out, but why spend the money if you don't need to, right? So I guess we're going to go ahead and try to open this up and see what's inside. Looks like you just have the 2 screws. There we go. There we go. You can see the back plane a little bit more clearly. All right, it's kind of hard to get a good look in here, but you can see here that it's got 2 sets of SATA ports, and actually one of those is an SAS port, the other one is a SATA port. So it does look like you can connect directly up with a SAS cable as opposed to a SATA cable. That's good to see. Okay, so here's the goodie bag that comes with it. That actually comes with labels for your discs. Then I guess we'll figure out what that is. I think it's just to cover up the some sort of bezel. Oh, that's a front panel block. I think part of it is because, oh, that's right. Now, if you use a larger GPU in here, which we're not going to do, like if you want to use this actually as a gaming case, not sure why you do that, but you can put a larger PCIe card there. You can pop out the sled for the drive and replace it with this guy here. What else we got? We got a filter screen. And then, oh, there's the Silverstone badge right there. And then some 3M tape on some sort of cushy pad there. And then, oh, a key for the to lock the cabinet. Obviously not real secure, just a cheap plastic key. And a bunch of screws. And then a tie down here. All right. So So, how do we install the ITX motherboard? Alright, I was going to record the process. Well, actually I did record the process of me building this, but it kind of ran into some issues, so I'm going to kind of summarize this build process as I went through it and kind of give you my feedback. And the drive cage itself, it can be removed by removing these 4 screws here and then 2 screws on the bottom. I'll go ahead and do that now. And you can see down here there's 2 screws right there. And that will allow you to remove this drive cage completely. But I have all the attachments. Alright, so you just slide this back. Now this is one of the problems, and I'll talk about that in a minute here. I'm going to disconnect all these. Okay, now I've got the drive cage out here. And I just wanted to mention that you really need to remove this whole drive cage from the system if you actually want to work on your motherboard in here, because it's such tight confines with this in place, right? Like this. You know, it's hard to get both hands in here to do any kind of work. So this has to come out, which means if you have your drive bays or your drives installed in here, you're almost going to have to pull all those out before you actually pull this out. So a little bit of a disassembly concern if you ever want to work on your motherboard at all. But in any case, here is the drive cage, and you can see let me get some more light in here. Oops. You can see there's the back plane with the 8 SATA connectors. 1, 2, 3 at the top, 2 in the middle here, and then 3 more at the bottom. And they do look like they have SAS connectors on there. And I will tell you right now that it does support SAS drives if you have the proper HBA connector or cables or controller card to support it. And on the back, you can go ahead and see here. Let's see if I can zoom this out a little bit. You can see here you've got your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 SATA ports there. Now you notice that there's 2 at each location. Well, they're labeled SAS and SATA. So I'm not sure why they do that, because at least I was able to insert the SAS drive into here, and I was connected to the SATA ports to PCIe HBA card, and I was able to recognize and run the SAS card just fine, or the SAS drive just fine. So not sure why they have the second one here. Maybe someone else is more smarter than I am, I wouldn't doubt it, and can tell me why that is. For power, you've got 1, 2, 3 SATA power cables, and then 1 4-pin Molex. And then it also has 2 3-pin fan connectors, so it can power the 2 case fans that are on the side here. Then obviously the back fan you're going to want to connect to your motherboard to control it that way. One more thing I wanted to bring up is the capacitors on here are really loose and they're really exposed. So when you go to install this in here and shove it around, I'm afraid of actually breaking these capacitors off of here. So something you might want to consider is putting some hot melt glue on there or something to hold it in place, or just be careful of it, because I have a feeling that these are just going to knock right off after removing this a few times in and out of this case. Surprised I haven't done it yet. Now this guy right here, you may be wondering, what is this here for? Well, this is a bracket so you can clear for a extra long or extra tall, or I guess full height PCIe card. So you're going to sacrifice one drive bay if you want to have a longer or taller PCIe card in here. The one thing that I don't like though is that this here is a LSI 9211 8i. It supports 8 SATA hard drives out of these connectors here, right? So obviously if you're going to be using this case with 8 hard drive bays, you're going to want to have a way to support those number of drives. And since most motherboards don't support more than 2 or 4, especially ITX motherboards don't support more than a few SATA slots on board, you're going to want to add an extra PCIe card. Now in this case, this is a pretty popular SAS to SATA adapter, LSI 9211 8i. So you can use an adapter like this guy. This is a 4-port version of it, and it'll break out from that connector to SATA connectors, if you're not familiar with that. So you think, okay, well this is a half height card, right? It's only half the height of the slot here, and you'd think that they would at least have clearance for that. Well, if I plug this in here, this is the full length. Basically, it's the length of this ITX motherboard in here. plug it in here. And then when I go to install this drive cage, it actually interferes. I don't know if you can see that very well. Let me see if I can get light in here. Get the camera down close. Got all these wires in the way. But this is actually pushing down on that PCIe card there, right? That black bracket that's part of this here. So even though it's a half height, it still won't accommodate it. And it's literally interfering by only a few millimeters. So if they, I don't understand why they didn't make this case maybe a little bit wider to accommodate at least half height cards all the way. Now, pull this out. So if you want to do that, you got to remove this bracket here and replace it with this bracket here, which will give it support on the inside, but you have to sacrifice a drive bay for that. And then on the outside, you would put this in place of the hard drive just to kind of finish it off. Okay, so now there's your bracket, and that's just to finish it off and give it support from the side. And then this guy would just plug into this right here. Finish it off just like that. So now thankfully there are other options for you if you don't, unless you already are want to use one of these, you're kind of screwed because you do have to sacrifice this port, this slot, this hard drive slot for this card. But they do make, if you just want a regular SATA adapter, or just a 4-pin, use 4 on board and then use the 4 off of this guy here. Or they actually make them with even slightly shorter, this guy here. It's basically the same as this, just a little bit shorter. So it's just something to be cognizant of if you're going to use this case. So some other things that I realized is that when I'm building this thing, you want to connect all the cables up front before you put in this drive cage, because it's impossible to reach down there like I noted. And there's really no tie downs in here anywhere either. So what you'll notice is this little guy here is actually 2.5-inch drive cage. So you can put 4 2.5-inch discs in here. But you can see I kind of just use it as a place to stuff all my wires into here. As I guess they could all go down here somewhere if you needed to. But again, there's really no place to tie it down. There's all kind of loose. Nothing to tie it down to. So overall, as far as the build is concerned, I don't feel it's the best design. Once you get everything built up, though, it's actually nice to have because it is definitely a compact case. And the drive trays actually slide in and out pretty easily out of the drive cage here. So, and I'll probably show some examples of that shortly. Now it's time to install all the discs. So it looks like they give you just enough screws. Well, it looks like you maybe have a couple extra left over to put in all 8 discs. So there's 4 left over. So there are some spares. A couple extra things I'd like to mention is that power button is on the outside here, but it's also on the inside, and you have your reset switch down here. You can access the reset switch from the outside. And also the 2 USB ports. There really is not enough clearance in here to even put a short USB drive in there either. It's just going to push up against this panel here. So if you need to plug in a USB drive, you're going to have to leave this panel open. Okay, so I have all 8 discs in here. I'm not going to pull them all out, but just to show you, they're in here. And I'm going to go ahead and power it up so you can kind of get an idea for the sound. It's actually pretty quiet with the fans that are in here. I'm going to move both the phone and the microphone over to the side here. Go ahead and power it on. Got this decibel meter here, so I'm going to let that settle down for a second here so you can get the silent, or I guess the ambient noise versus the startup. It's actually, the fans are actually pretty quiet. I'm pretty impressed. That's the one thing you'll notice, that there is slight buzzes, something loose in this container. If I put a little bit of pressure on it, it stops. So it does a little, and plus this front panel here, notice that it's pretty loose. Even if I lock it with the key, I give this key, it's not really a secure lock, but oh, tightens it up a little bit, but it's prone to some BSRs or buzz, squeak, and rattles. So you see when it's up here, it's not quite as bad. It's down here, it's a little bit louder. So I installed Open Media Vault so I can build a RAID array as well as do some file transfers and check for temperatures. Okay, here's the disks, and we go to our Smart Info here, we go to Devices, and you can see the temperatures of the disks that are in here. And this has been sitting here for a little while prior to me recording all this stuff. So they're looking at sit around 37 to 40 degrees. Actually, this last one is the SSD, so ignore that one. The rest are the 8 2 terabyte disks that are in there. So they're all around 37, 38, 40, 41, 39, 37. So now I'm going to go ahead and create software RAID. Go RAID 6. And select 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Save. Apply. I did write a script that will monitor and record the drive temperatures as the RAID is being built, and I will show those results later. And now the RAID has been built. I'm going to do a 100 gigabyte file transfer just to check the cooling performance of this under load. Now clearly the RAID rebuild I think is a bigger stress test than a file copy, but a file copy is your common use case in something like this. So you can go over here and you can see the disks. SDA through SDH. SDI is the boot SSD, ignore that. And then you can go ahead and see the current idle temperatures of the disks right here. They actually look like they're running a little high, but we'll see how it fares when it's been loaded. Now you see this one disk says bad. Basically there's just a smart attribute that the system doesn't like, but the disk is actually fine otherwise. And I do have these set up as a MD RAID 6, software RAID 6, so 2 disk parity, 6 disks usable. That's about 11 terabytes of usable space. And I do have this set up on a shared folder called data under this IP address 192.168.1.105, and it is shared over SMB share right here. So if I bring up 192.168.105 in that data folder, it's right here. And then I do have this folder here. It's got 100 gigabytes of files, all 1 gigabyte each. And then I do have a Linux bash script here connected to this Open Media Vault system in this case, and I'm going to monitor the temps every 10 seconds as we do the file transfer. And so why don't we go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and start this bash script. Okay, and then I'm going to initiate the file transfer. I'm going to go ahead and time this test. And then we'll check the temperatures after it's done. So here I'm going to show you the temperature results from both idle building a RAID array as well as file transfer. And just for convention's sake, here you can see here I've labeled it top disk as disk 1, all the way down to disk 8 at the bottom. Now here's the temperatures during idle over a 2-hour time span. And basically after I powered it up, I went ahead and just started recording temperatures, and it took temperature every 10 minutes. And here it is over time. You can see here there's a fairly significant delta between this disk 4 and this disk 7 of about 8 or 9 degrees Celsius. So there may be some issues, I thought, with the cooling in certain zones in the case. So here is the disk temperature over time over a course of 400 minutes, which is what, about 7 hours. And temperature again was taken every 10 minutes. And again, disk 4 was the coolest and disk 7 was the warmest. Keep in mind that these are all the same kind of disks as well. And then lastly, the file transfer test. Basically, temperature was taken every 10 seconds because it's only like a 15-minute transfer test. And you can see here the temperatures were pretty much steady across the board, but the delta was pretty significant again between disk 4 and disk 7, with everything laying in the middle. So here's the actual average disk temperatures of those graphs you just saw, and here it is at idle, here is it at RAID 6 build, and here it is a 100 gigabyte file transfer. You can notice here again the disk 4 here was the coolest, whereas disk 7 was the warmest in all scenarios, and everything was in between. So I was thinking, okay, is this really a disk issue or is it a cooling zone issue? So you can see here, I basically categorized each of these bays by temperature. The lowest was a 1, highest was an 8, and everything in between. So in order to see if I could figure out if it was really a cooling issue with the case or the fans, I basically swapped the lowest temperature zone with the highest temperature zone disk. So in this case, 1 and 8 swapped positions, right? So this, by 1 and 8, I mean the temperature zone. So disk 4, disk 7 swap positions. You can see over here. And then the second warmest and the second hottest disk, again, 2 and 7. So 2, which would be disk 8, and 7, disk 6. Those swap zones, so on and so forth. And I redid the file transfer test and recorded temperatures. Now you can see the delta between the disks is much tighter. So that seems a little better. But I'm not sure if that really tells us anything with regards to whether it's a cooling zone issue or if it's a disk cooling issue, the disk itself, whether it runs warm. So if you take, for example, here, now here is the original 100 gigabyte file transfer temperatures. Then here are the disk temps. These temperatures here are the same in both of these images. Basically, it tells you the absolute temperature of those disks during the file transfer. And then after I did the disk swap. And then this in parentheses here shows us the delta temperature or change in temperature from the original file transfer and then after the disk swap. Now in this image here, this shows us the delta temperature of the actual disk. So disk 3 went up to this spot here from slot 3 to slot 1, and it went from 41 degrees to 39 degrees. That's why there's a -2 temperature difference here. Now if we look at just straight across the bay wise, right? So this first bay was 40 degrees, and over here the disk was 39 degrees after the disk swap, and so that's just a delta of -1. So basically I'm looking at the temperature change of the disk and then just the temperature change of the bay. So if we look at the highest temperature disk, the lowest temperature disk, which was disk 4 here in slot 4, right, labeled as 1, and then the highest temperature disk, which was disk 7 here in zone 8 in slot 7. And you can see here, so disk 7 and disk 4 were swapped, and so your highest temperature disk went from 45 degrees to 40 degrees, and your lowest temperature disk went from 38 degrees up to 39 degrees. So basically this says, okay, well this zone seems like it's definitely cooler, but it seems like this disk would get hotter too as well in this zone, like the disk 7 did, but it didn't seem to be the case. So I guess you can read into this what you will. I think this zone here is probably the coolest area of the case, but everything else is pretty much on par. Now the other thing I want to mention is that here are 4 SAS drives. Hopefully you can see that connector there. And the back plane also supports SAS drives, and they plug in just fine. And they're actually detected just fine in the operating system. And you can see here, there they are all detected. Okay, so to summarize this Silverstone DS380, look at the pros, cons, and some neutral comments on here. It is definitely a compact hot swap 8-bay case, and as far as compact goes, at least compact for a traditional ITX form factor case. You look at this Synology 8-bay unit here, clearly this dwarfs that by a little bit. It looks like it may be nearly double the volume. But as far as ITX cases go, you actually have easy access to all 8 drive bays in here and can build it up how you want to. Now, speaking of which, these drive bays are actually pretty easily removable, installable. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort, just kind of click and slide. And on that same note, it does support SATA or even SAS drives if you have the proper HBA card to support SAS. It does have an all-metal construction, except for this front bezel here, and also this side bezel, that the fan grill, this guy right here. And it does come with 3 fans as well, and they are quiet and they perform decently, give adequate cooling, and it does give provisions, at least for the 2 side fans, to connect to the back plane to power those as well. It also accommodates a large CPU fan and heat sinks too, so you don't have to worry too much about the height of your CPU fan, although in a NAS situation you're probably not going to have too powerful of a CPU anyways. Now, as far as cons, the negative side, it is difficult to build in. You really need to disassemble that drive cage just to get access to your motherboard. Otherwise, there's a very small pocket to get 2 hands in there to be able to do anything. There's also no tie downs or any kind of cable management to help tidy up your cables as well. And if you were to put all 8 discs in there, as well as the 4 discs, the 4 2.5-inch discs in there, your cables are going to be really tight and probably suffocate your case a little bit. Now, it is also subject to some BSRs or some buzz, squeaks, and rattles. And just when it's running, I tend to hear a little bit of vibrating, a little buzz here and there. This front door is a little bit loose too, so it can tend to, cause a little bit of buzzing as well. Even if you lock it from the side, it tightens it up a little bit, but it still can cause a little bit of a rattle. But I think the worst part is that if you want to use a full-length card, now even if it's half height, while the case itself will accommodate a full-height card, if you want to go beyond, I don't know what the dimension is, but if you want a card that's going to run basically the length of the ITX board, you're going to have to sacrifice a drive bay in order to accommodate it. So just something to be cognizant of. And then just a few points about this case is it does use an SFX PSU, not an ATX, so that's something to consider. And it also supports a mini ITX form factor, but that could limit expansion options, right? Because you only have 1 PCIe slot and limited onboard SATA ports. And then, although on the good side there, it does have dual SAS and SATA ports on there, so you can run either SAS or SATA through that back plane. And that back plane also provides or requires 3 SATA power connectors and 1 Molex connector. Overall, I think it's a nice case once you get it built. It's just building it up to use it is kind of a pain in the butt. So I hope you enjoyed this review, and until next time, talk to you later.